Hey guys.
Morning.
Sorry, today's been a little nutsy. Thank you, Mary, so much for taking the lead. Sorry to be.
So I know that there was a conversation that you had with Rosie
Mhm.
about including information with regards to, do you remember? If information on immigration
Sure.
and that portion would not be recorded or something like that?
We could do that. So one of the things that we've done
Do you
sometimes
want us
is,
to not include that information is what I guess.
okay, great. So we're going to record this for welcome. Good morning. I'm Jamie Jeanette. I'm with Health, Housing, and Homeless Services. We host these monthly trainings for homeless service providers. We, for this training, will be recording, and we will also be providing the slide deck and the recording after the training. So you don't have to take furiously scribbled notes. If that's how you like to do it, great, but you're going to get all this material afterwards. I'm going to do a little bit of intro, and then we're going to turn things over to the trainers. So today, the training is how to support families with children or unaccompanied minors. And we're going to have folks from the Office of Education providing this training today. If you go to the next slide, just a few housekeeping things. So we're going to have probably close to 100 people in this training today. So because of that, we're keeping kind of automatically mute everyone. If you are accidentally unmuted, we are going to drop the hammer and mute you. It's nothing personal. Sometimes folks join and there's background noise. Um, if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat or raise your little virtual hand. We will be doing we're going to be emailing you afterwards. And I'm going to do a really quick poll. We always like to do a quick poll to just see who is in the room. So I'm going to launch this real quickly. So we just like to see, we look at our meetings and trainings to see, do the population of people coming, do our providers that are getting trained reflect the demographics and the populations that we're serving. So your answers are not being recorded for you individually, but there's so that you should see a quiz on your screen. It will ask about what race and ethnicity best describes you. Have you experienced unsheltered homelessness within the past 7 years? What best describes your agency if you're with an agency, those kind of services that you provide, and then what best describes your role? And what is your age? And again, we just want to see kind of this also helps the trainers see who's here, especially in terms of like agency and role. Um, so we're just going to take a minute and have folks answer that. And if you go to the next slide, while that poll is running, we're just going to cover a few more things. So just some basic training norms. We're asking folks, as always, to respect the trainers, respect your attendees. And then the last three are really about just being mindful of yourself and how you're bringing yourself to the training and to this shared space. So if you're a big talker like me, it might be great to like hang back a little bit. If you tend to not ask questions or take a risk, this could be a good opportunity to take a risk and ask a question or share something. And just again, asking folks to acknowledge their power and privilege. So thinking about uh, again, how we're bringing ourselves to this space. Okay, if you go to the next slide, I'm actually going to end the poll and we're going to share the results so we can see a little bit about the demographics of who's here. It's great. So we have a good chunk of people here that have a lived experience of homelessness. Most of the folks here are working either with an agency that provides homeless services or something adjacent. We have some community members, which is great. We have a lot of case managers, housing navigators, some outreach and other, and then mostly adult with a few transition age youth. So great. So in terms of the training, so we offer these monthly. They're typically the second Monday of every month, and these are required trainings. We are offering one next month about the Violence Against Women Act and serving survivors of domestic violence. So you'll get an email about that soon. These are required, and that's part of why we're like asking you to change your name on the profile just to make sure that we know who's here. Next slide, please. Okay, this is like really hard to read, but you will get these slides. This just tells you partly why we're doing this training. So there are some pieces that we're going to talk about in this training that are required by the federal government, who's our biggest funder, to make sure there are laws and requirements, making sure that if we're serving people, families and children, that there are some big components about making sure that they can access their education, and that we're in compliance with what the laws say. So this is like the bureaucratic language about why we're doing this. You're going to hear more in like plain language about why this is important and how to do it. But just so you have those breadcrumbs should you ever need it. You can go to the next slide. Again, this is just the more like nuts and bolts. So we want to make sure that all of our providers are have access to this information so that we can make sure everybody is providing services in the ways that we need to, both from sort of a compliance perspective, but also to make sure that we're really doing things the best way we can. And some of that is just like knowing how to do this. So um, we we do track to just make sure that agencies are attending, and if not, we'll reach out. Next slide. So lastly, as with all of our trainings, as we move into this training, we ask folks to really think about this particular topic with a lens around equity. So thinking about are there inequities in your own work on this topic, right? So are you seeing patterns of people having different experiences um, that may be based on things like race, ethnicity, language access, age, disabilities. And as you're seeing these, have you maybe made some oopses and contributed to making those things, those gaps bigger? Or maybe you've noticed things and said like, oh, I have an opportunity to like interrupt this. And again, these are all rhetorical, but also like, are there any barriers or things that you see? Do you have any thoughts as you're going through this training? Like, aha, now I can see this with a different lens, and I have some thoughts about how we might be able to make this better. So again, not asking for magical answers now, but just to hold that lens as you're going through the training. Okay, go to the next slide. And I think, okay, with that, I'm going to turn things over to the folks from the Office of Ed. And I am going to mute myself and turn things over. Thanks,
Thank you,
Lee.
Jamie. We appreciate you and the introduction. As Jamie said, you are here to learn how to support families with minor children as well as unaccompanied minors. Welcome and introduction. We'll start with introducing ourselves, and then I know many of you already started to put your name and organizations in the chat, so no need to worry about that when we get to those slides. I'm Alejandra Chamberlain. I'm the Director of Youth Services for the Contra Costa County Office of Education. Gina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gina Bills. I'm the Education Liaison here at the County Office of Ed.
And Rosie.
You're muted, Rosie.
I'm going to assume, she needs permission to unmute herself.
Mary, can you make her a co-host? Can you make all three of them co-hosts?
Here we go.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Rosie Reed, and I actually don't work at the County Office of Education. I work at a school district, Mount Diablo Unified School District, but I enjoy working with our team from the Contra Costa County Office of Education. We like to come together so we can give a little perspective on here's the higher level, the law, what it's supposed to look like, and then I come in and this is what we do on the ground to support. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you all for being here. I heard on the radio it is Super Sick Monday, and 26 million people are expected to call out sick today, but you are all here, so thank you.
Thank you. And then, as I mentioned, we did have a slide with the intention of hearing from you all, but most of you have already introduced yourselves with name, title, and agency. You're welcome to add how many years you've been with the CoC if you choose to, but I acknowledge that many of you have already entered that information into the chat, so we appreciate it. We also appreciate the poll. It gives us a sense of how many individuals are in this webinar, what their experience is, and how they come to this training and what information we should share. So thank you. Quick overview of the Contra Costa County Office of Education. In Contra Costa, this information is from 23-24, so we do acknowledge it's a little old. We haven't had the broader data for the county for the 24-25 year, so forgive me. But it doesn't change too much. So we have 287 schools countywide, 18 districts, and of course, many charters. And overall, the enrollment was 169,000, forgive me, 394 students. And then the charter enrollment, you can see 13,000. Overall, our intention as the County Office of Education is to provide some direct services as well as provide oversight and support to schools and districts and high-level professional development and opportunities to grow, not only for teachers, counselors, principals, but also as well as directors and superintendents. There are different opportunities for all levels to grow and continue their professional development, and then as well cutting edge innovation. So looking at what can we do differently, what can we do to support the 18 districts as well to ultimately support the children receiving the services. Here's some more data with regards to the different populations. Often you'll see this data broken into the different areas that you're seeing now. So English language learners, youth who are in foster care, children and youth who are experiencing homelessness, students with disabilities, and so forth. And for those of you attending today, our focus will be on that 1.4%, acknowledging it is a smaller population of the overall enrollment. And that is sometimes important to keep in mind when we are collaborating and coordinating with the districts or a school site, that often not everyone on a campus knows when a child or a youth is experiencing homelessness, and unfortunately sometimes get lost in the larger population of the school site or the district. So it's important to have partners like you all to be able to encourage and remind everyone about their rights and supports. Within the County Office of Ed, we have Youth Services, which is the department that we are under. And Youth Services provides a variety of supports to the districts, particularly around technical assistance and professional development. So I like to say we're like a favorite aunt to the districts when it comes to supporting children and youth who are in foster care or experiencing homelessness, and just making sure that they know the rights of the youth as well as new laws that pass and how to ensure that they, the district liaisons like Rosie, are able to support the school sites and therefore able to support the children and the youth. And we have the pleasure, because we're at the county level, we get to work with the 18 districts, as I mentioned, and the charters, but also the community colleges, probation, juvenile court, child welfare, community-based organizations, CoC. It's our privilege and our honor to be able to bring as many members together with the intention of making sure that children and youth are getting the services that they need. These are the overview of the programs within YS, and today we're going to focus on the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program. And I will pass it on to Gina. Oh no, Rosie.
No. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And a little information on where we are headed today. So what we'll be doing for the next 2 hours is providing you with some information on supporting families with minors, as well as our unaccompanied youth. So we'll be discussing how to take the educational needs of children into account when it comes to placing our families in housing. We'll be talking about how to inform our families with children and youth that are experiencing homelessness and what their educational rights are when it comes to part of the intake process and procedures. We'll discuss the educational rights and services and what is required for our homeless families, children, and unaccompanied youth that are experiencing housing instability and how it pertains to the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about not only coordinating within the CoC, but also other agencies that you may be working with. Department of Social Services, County Offices of Ed, Education Liaisons, and any other providers as needed. We'll also have the opportunity for some Q&A and discussion. And then just friendly reminder that you're welcome to put any questions, comments, or thoughts into the chat at any time throughout our time together today. Next slide, please. Okay, so we want to hear from you. We're going to be asking you folks in the chat pane for some input throughout the morning, and we'll be asking the question, what do you think, several times for the next couple of hours. And we have a pretty good sized group here, so that can only mean a bunch of good answers. Next slide, please. So we are going to start with this question when it comes to our homeless youth countywide. How many students were identified as homeless in Contra Costa County during the 2024-25 school year? And you can just go ahead and drop your answers in the chat and get some thoughts on that. So best guess. And I'll ask the team to monitor the chat and see what answers we come up with.
So we have, can they hear me? Unmute. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I have to, Gina's in my office, so we were trying to figure out so there's not an echo. So we have 2,215, about 3%, 1,800, 1.4%. Someone was paying attention while I was reviewing the slides, so good for you. 500, 2,000, 1,900, 58, 100, 3,000, 1,200, 50%, 6%, 700, 2,600, 4%, 300, 2,500, 350. So Gina?
Wow, a range of answers there. So next slide, please. Actually, 2,563 homeless children and youth were identified as homeless countywide. So thank you everyone for participating. I think someone in the chat that Alejandro mentioned was really close to that number. Next slide, please. When it comes to our homeless children and youth, who are they exactly and how do we identify them? Homeless children and youth are identified as homeless under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. Next slide, please. A little background to start with when it comes to the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. It started way back in 1987. It was known back then as the Stuart B. McKinney Act. It got signed into law, and it required states to really look at what was going on when it came to residency requirements for students that were trying to get in school but were experiencing homelessness. So that was the overarching theme of the McKinney-Vento Act. We don't really have residency requirements because we're experiencing homelessness. So the act came into play. A couple of years went by, and then in 1990, it came back as the McKinney Act, this time saying, okay, all of barriers that students are experiencing when it comes to enrolling in school need to be eliminated. We need to provide some supports, get things in place so that our homeless students are successfully achieving positive academic success. But the McKinney-Vento Act wasn't done, and a few more years went by, and in 1994, the education portion of the McKinney-Vento Act now put in the Every Student Succeeds Act, also known as ESSA, into the McKinney-Vento Act. And it also said, okay, we're also going to include our little guys, our preschoolers, and really hone in on interagency collaboration with the McKinney-Vento Act. So almost a decade went by, and then in 2002, it came back bigger and badder than ever as the McKinney-Vento Act that we all know and love today. And then they did tack on one more piece saying, okay, the McKinney-Vento Act looks good. We've got some supports in place, but now all districts are required to appoint a liaison to make sure that everyone's following the law and that our homeless students are getting the rights and responsibilities that they're entitled to. Next slide, please. The McKinney-Vento Act is a federal law. It ensures the educational rights and protections of our children and youth experiencing homelessness. The McKinney-Vento Act, when it comes to funding, is authorized for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program. That money is allocated to the California Department of Ed. So it goes to CDE, and then that money is provided to counties and then distributed among our local education agencies, also known as LEAs, based on need. The McKinney-Vento Act law also says that homeless children and youth should have equal and immediate access to education, the same as their housed peers. And then it also applies to our local school districts and our charter schools. So anything considered a local education agency, an LEA, is subject to the McKinney-Vento Act. And you'll see as we go through this information that the ultimate goal of the McKinney-Vento Act is really to ensure that homeless students are identified, they're properly enrolled in a timely manner, and that they're ultimately succeeding in school. Next slide, please. So here we are again, another what do you think? This time, I'm asking the question, the McKinney-Vento Act formally defines homelessness as sharing the housing of other persons due to relocation, bankruptcy, loss of housing, job loss, or economic hardship. So we're testing your McKinney-Vento definition knowledge here. So go ahead and let us know in the chat what you think. Do you know what the definition says? And which of the following are included in the McKinney-Vento Act definition of homelessness? So we'll pause for a minute and see what folks come back with. It could be one answer, it could be two or three, it could be all of them, it could be none of the above. Let us know what you think.
Economic hardship, loss of housing, all of the above, all of the above, all, loss of housing, economic hardship.
Ready? I'm ready. So the McKinney-Vento Act formally defines homelessness as sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing. Next slide, please. Economic hardship or similar reason is the actual wording. So economic hardship and loss of housing are included in the McKinney-Vento Act definition of homelessness. And we really enjoy hearing from you guys. So thank you for dropping your answers in the chat. Let's start with the definition of homelessness. This definition is the one used by U.S. public schools and defined by federal law, and who's eligible when it comes to protections under the McKinney-Vento Act. And the McKinney-Vento Act defines homelessness as children and youth lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And that fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence really serves as the overarching guiding phrase of the definition when it comes to the McKinney-Vento Act. So you may hear the question posed as, is the student lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence? Again, referred to that guiding phrase of the definition of homelessness when it comes to the McKinney-Vento Act. But the McKinney-Vento Act continues on and also includes some other situations and living arrangements that might not otherwise be considered homeless, but they are because they're not considered fixed, regular, and adequate. And that includes folks living in hotels or motels, camping grounds, trailer parks, when it's due to lack of alternative adequate accommodations. And trailer parks can get a little dicey when it comes to identifying homelessness under the McKinney-Vento Act. I have a relative, my uncle, he lives in a mobile home park a couple of hours away from here. And some of you have probably been to these retirement communities that are in these giant trailer parks, and people drive around in golf carts and they play bingo on Tuesday nights. And that's where my uncle lives. And his trailer is perfectly adequate. He has 2 bathrooms, electricity, and windows that open, and all of the good things that you want to have in an adequate housing situation. And he lives there because it's fun and he enjoys it. So it's really important when it comes to lacking fixed, regular, and adequate, identifying the adequacy of each individual situation. Living on a campground is another one that we often run into. Some situations are never going to be adequate. When it comes to a campground, unless you're the person living at the campground because you work there and you have adequate accommodations, you live on site and your housing is adequate, obviously that would not be homeless. But for the most part, most of these situations would be classified as inadequate. But we always want to make sure that we're asking that question on a case-by-case basis. Sharing the housing with other persons due to housing, economic hardship, or similar reason that we just learned from our quiz. We know that when families lose their housing, oftentimes there's nowhere for them to go. Sometimes the shelters are full. Sometimes families do not want to go to a shelter because of safety concerns. But we are finding that about 75% of our families and students that are identified as homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act fall into the doubled up category. Living in emergency transitional shelters, places not ordinarily used as sleeping accommodations for humans, such as bus stations, train stations, park benches, vehicles. Those may be more of your stereotypical situations when you think of our homeless families. But ultimately, a lot of our families are doubled up. The McKinney-Vento Act also goes on to include families who have experienced a housing disaster, such as a fire, a flood, an earthquake. But of course, we always want to stay close to the letter of the law and ask every single time. What is their current living situation, and is it fixed, regular, and adequate? Next slide, please. And a little more context on fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residences. The McKinney-Vento Act does not give specific and official determinations when it comes to fixed, regular, and adequate. But I wanted to look at each one so that we could work through each one together. So a fixed residence is just that. It's stationary, it's permanent, it's not subject to change. An example of a fixed residence would be an apartment, or an example of a residence that is not fixed would be a tent. When it comes to a regular residence, that's used on a consistent, a routine, predictable basis. So an example of a residence that is regular would be a home that a family owns. They intend to stay there long term, where an example of a residence that would not be regular, that's your couch surfers, that's your doubled up families. Maybe they are only permitted to stay for a specific length of time, or someone who's couch surfing that could be asked to leave the residence at any time. An adequate residence sufficiently meets the physical and psychological needs for shelter. So an example of a residence that is adequate would be a home that is in good repair. It has enough space for the number of people that are residing in the home, where an example of a residence that is inadequate would be an abandoned building. Next slide, please. And I will pass it over to Rosie.
And before Rosie, we get started, I'm going to put a flow chart in the chat that will help you navigate what liaisons will most likely, in some degree, whether it's using the chart or whether it's going through a couple questions to determine is a family who is showing up to a school site experiencing homelessness. So hopefully you find that useful. Particularly, we did have a question in the chat. We have a couple slides, so we'll try to get through those and then wait to see how much time we have to get to those questions. But if we don't get to your question, hopefully the chart will help you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the rights and services of our McKinney-Vento youth. I do think the question is relevant to what we're going to talk about here in terms of the question I see in the chat is how long does a student need to have inadequate housing before qualifying for McKinney-Vento? And really the answer is the very irritating answer of, well, it depends, right? Every situation is a little bit different. So when we have a family who is experiencing homelessness, for example, we had a family who their apartment burnt down. But then the apartment complex put them up. And then that one night, and then they moved them into an apartment the next day, and it was fully furnished. They gave them all of the, all the stuff, and then they gave them money to buy all new stuff. And so we talked to them, do you feel like you need to be under the McKinney-Vento Act? And they're like, no, we're good, because they were really never truly, there was one night where there was a crisis. So that was one situation where a family whose house burnt down would not be McKinney-Vento. Then there's other ones where they're displaced because of a fire and they have nowhere to go. So the situations really are on a case-by-case basis. Similarly, in terms of adequacy, if families don't have access to basic utilities for a prolonged period of time, that would be considered McKinney-Vento. And this is important for our identifications at schools. However, like if we forgot to pay our bill and we have a day or two where we're getting that turned back on, that would not be considered prolonged inadequacy. And so I'm going to bring that back in just a second. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Alejandra. So when we're talking here about the rights and services, we want to talk about the educational rights of McKinney-Vento youth, the right to immediate enrollment, the right to school of origin, transportation, and graduation. So those are some 5 of the key areas that we are going to be talking about today. There are additional rights that we'll try to kind of weave in, or not really rights so much, but priorities in terms of how we try to assist families when they're in our program. So the first thing is that your child can enroll in school. The student who is experiencing homelessness, in all of those ways that Gina just talked about, can enroll in school today. And we'll talk about which school they can enroll in just a moment. But this means that even if the student does not have the typical papers, let's go back to the example of the fire that we just spoke about. They might not have their birth certificate. Perhaps it was lost in a fire. Perhaps they don't have access to their immunizations, or maybe they're not caught up on their immunizations because they've had to bounce around so much. They can enroll in school without all of the necessary documents that are typically required for enrollment. The school district might choose to send out a child welfare and attendance liaison to verify where the family is staying, or to go out and meet with the family and do a needs assessment. But the child can enroll in school, and there needs to be a process for that without those documents. So what do you think? Here's another one for you to pop those answers into the chat. How can this information be incorporated into the intake process? Have you encountered any challenges with enrollment? So as a liaison, I'm particularly interested to hear the challenges you may have experienced when supporting a family and helping their children get enrolled in school, or stories that you have maybe heard. Or it's been glorious. Everyone's gotten enrolled in school. This is wonderful news. I will say the enrollment piece is one area where I feel like we get the kiddos enrolled pretty quickly, so that's helpful. Yeah, okay. Let's go on to the next one. Hopefully we will have time to talk about some of the other what do you think is a little bit more deeply. So like I said, that first one is that right to that immediate enrollment, that the students can enroll without all of those necessary documents. And that this can be a little bit tricky. For example, we can't require academic records to enroll a student, but let's say that the student has an IEP, or an individualized education plan, for special education. So in that situation, while the student has a right to enroll immediately, we're going to do our level best to go as quickly as possible. We need to have that IEP to make sure that the student is being placed appropriately. For example, a student may require specialized instruction all day long. They might need to be placed in an SDC class. So placing that student immediately in a general education class just to get them enrolled right away is not always the best thing, right? We want to get as much as we can to get the student started. However, we cannot be putting up roadblocks to make students not able to start as quickly as possible. So most students come in and they are able to start the next day. That's the general routine that you would see. Occasionally, you might be working with a family, and if the child has more has different needs, then there might be a couple days, but it should never be more than 2, 3, 4 days. It should not be getting up to like a week. Okay, so thinking about that as the guideline of usually the next day, in more specialized case, probably 2 days, maybe 3 days at the most. Even if the student is missing their applications for enrollment, or maybe they're missing a gap, they have a gap in their enrollment, they still need to be able to enroll today. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do you think? During an intake assessment, a parent shares that their 2 children, ages 8 and 12, have been attending school only twice a week since the family has been living in their vehicle. What questions can be asked to better understand the family's needs? What would we need to know to be able to help this student get access to school every day? Are they willing to go to a shelter? That's a great one. Whether parent has adequate transportation, great question. And as a school district, I know that in our school district, we typically will provide bus passes or a Clipper card, depending on where the family is staying. And if the parent needs to accompany a smaller child, the parent would be required to have that transportation assistance as well. How to provide transportation, yeah, we just talked about that one. where they're located, does the car run, can they go to a shelter? Yes, these are all great questions to consider. Thank you. Next slide, please. So it's important when we're talking about enrolling in a student. I like the question here. Why only attending twice weekly? Is it transportation, housing? What can we do and what do you need in order to regularly attend? Yes, that would be a question probably to figure out, are they staying in one place one part of the week, at another place another part of the week? And then figuring out that would definitely qualify for McKinney-Vento. So although the students have a right to enroll immediately, they don't necessarily have the right to enroll in any school out there. Okay, there's a couple of different guidelines in terms of what school the students will be able to enroll in. So the first is their school of residence. Well, we know we don't have a permanent residence, hence our qualification for McKinney-Vento. What is the school closest to where the family is currently laying their head, at least some of the time? Okay, so that's the phrase we often use, is where do they lay their head? So the local education agency needs to assist the family in enrolling in that school closest to where they're staying right now. If there's space available, if the school is full, they may be overflowed to the next closest school. But in that case, they would need to be first on the waiting list to go to that school if a space became available. That is the school of residence, the one closest to where they lay their head. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to look at the school of origin. So the school of origin, there's 3 different ways to look at that. The first is the school the youth attended before they became unhoused. The last time they were permanently housed, what was the school or feeder pattern? For example, if it's elementary, what's the middle school that goes with that, or the high school that goes with that? What is the school that they attended before they became unhoused? What was the school the student was last enrolled in? Or maybe they left school for an extended period of time. Or, and this is the one that's really surprising to people, any school that the youth has a strong connection to from the last 15 months. Okay, but let's think about that. We've got our school of residence, the one that's closest to where we're staying now. And then we have the school that was before they became unhoused, the school that was what they were last enrolled in, or any school from the last 15 months. That does not mean any school. So we have to make sure we're working in those parameters of the school of residence or the school of origin, any of the 3 definitions of school of origin. Next slide, please. So the school of selection is the school of origin or the school of residence. So that means that the student can choose if they want to attend the school of residence or the school of origin, as long as there's space available. The parent or the educational rights holder gets to decide which of those schools they want, as long as there is space available. For students in transitional kindergarten through 8th grade, they get to stay in that school of origin for the remainder of the academic year, even if they become securely housed. High school students can stay in their high school throughout the rest of high school, even if they've moved out of the area, even if they are no longer considered McKinney-Vento. So for school of origin transportation may be provided as needed to and from the school of origin at the request of a parent or guardian. The key word there is as needed. If it is not provided in another way, if the student could not reasonably walk, if it's across the street, transportation is not going to be provided. So if it is needed to get to school, then that would be provided to the student, and it's typically provided via public transportation. When a formerly student obtains permanent housing, we need to continue providing the transportation for the remainder of the academic year. So in the case of the high school student who can remain at that high school for multiple years, they would not receive transportation beyond that first year.
I think something to note in regards to transportation, Rosie, it's still at the discretion of the district, as well as the collaboration between what's feasible for that particular case. We know that we wouldn't put a first grader on a bus by themselves. So those are the things to consider. Transportation, unfortunately, is so broad, but when we're having conversations with the families, door-to-door service is not always available. A bus card or a bus ticket may not be reasonable for a first grader, or the family doesn't have a car, so we can't give them gas cards, right? So it's a conversation, and it's important to know and share with the families that it will be something that we will talk it through and really look at what is reasonable and makes sense for each case by case.
I think that's really important that you brought that up, Alejandra, because we're coming out of a time when there was a bit of COVID money, right? So there was a lot more door-to-door service money. We used to pay for a ton of door-to-door services for families, and now we just don't have the funding. So in a time where a lot of the school districts are moving into budget cuts, while they would often like to provide that door-to-door service, it is not available. We're not doing it at all this year because we can't. We don't have the funding for it. So thank you for sharing that. So the dispute resolution process is very important to note that if the school district perhaps does not contest that the family is unhoused or that the family is staying where they would like to stay, or the family says where they're staying, sorry. If the school district is contesting that the family is unhoused, or the school district is contesting that the family is residing where they say they're residing, or if the family would like to contest what the educational rights holder has chosen in terms of the school they would like to attend, in terms of the best interest determination, the school of origin, any of that. If there's any disagreement, the parent or the educational rights holder gets to decide. So that's really important for us to note, that if there's ever a disagreement between the school district and the parent, we could just kind of insert for any reason, then the parent gets to have the student go to that school until the dispute resolution is concluded. At that point, then it would go to the liaison, who would be me and the district, and we would write up why we believe that this family is either not unhoused, or they are not staying where they say they're staying, or why the family, it's not in the student's best interest to attend that school of origin that the family has said that they would like to stay at. And that goes to the Contra Costa County Office of Education, who then makes their determination, and will say if that's true or not. If this seems like I'm going to go with the district and I'm going to send it up to the CDE, or they're going to say, no, we side with the family and we're going to say that the student gets to go to this school, or the student is unhoused, or any of those kinds of determinations. So there's a process here. But the main thing to remember is that the student gets to go to that selected school and throughout the duration of this process. So first it goes to the district, then it goes to CCCOE, and if needed, it goes all the way up to CDE. But the entire time we're in that process, the student is attending their chosen school.
And in particular, there are 3 areas or categories that a family can dispute to the district, and then it would go, as Rosie mentioned, to the County Office of Ed, and then potentially to CDE. But I have to acknowledge that I'm afraid to try to open the document, because then you guys might see my screens, and I was doing a horrible job of not doing that previously when I was trying to find the flow chart. So at some point, I will make sure to put it in the chat or send it to Jamie around what are the 3 categories. One of them is eligibility. The other one is school selection. And then there's one more, and I apologize, I cannot think of it at this very moment. So outside of those 3, unfortunately, the parents they still have the opportunity to have those discussions, bring it to the attention of the administrator at the school site at the district, but in particular around it going up the process of getting to CDE or COE, it would only fall under 3 categories.
And Caitlin, I see your question in the chat. You're talking about CPS and CFS. In terms of whether or not these families will be reported to CPS and CFS, homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness in and of itself is not child abuse or neglect. We have about 200 students who qualify for the McKinney-Vento Act in our program that are, nobody's called CPS, nobody's in CPS. And it's not so much from the McKinney-Vento Act side, it's from the child welfare side, where they're very clear if a report is made, are we just reporting homelessness, because that is not a crime. Now, there are sometimes cases where we have a student or a family who's McKinney-Vento, and because of their circumstances, there's maybe additional neglect or abuse happening, but we're not going to call homelessness itself neglect. We would need to see that the child is not, having regular access to showers, and the parent is trying those kinds of things. So we know that showering is a particular challenge for school-age children, because a lot of the shower trailers are during school hours, but the parent is trying. They get a hotel twice a week, and then they go shower, or they go, they find ways. We're seeing that they're doing their absolute best. That alone would not be a reason to call CPS. Okay, so what do you think? You're assisting a family staying at Antioch's safe parking program. Their high school aged child was previously enrolled in a high school in Richmond before being placed in emergency housing. What is the school of origin? Let's start with that. And then what is the school of residence? And then how can the school and shelter work together to support the student's academic stability?
And it's okay to be vulnerable or get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We acknowledge this is not your every day-to-day experience that you're having to figure out which one's the school of origin and which one's the school of residency. So
you can even say district too if you're not sure what the name of the school is. So remember, school of residence, we could say district of residence is the one where the student is currently staying right now. So start with that one. What's the district of residence? Yes, school of origin is Richmond. Thank you, Selena. And then Antioch is the school of residence or the district of residence, right? So then how can the school and the shelter work together to support the student's academic stability? This is by having a best interest determination meeting. And that means that the representatives of the Richmond School District and the Antioch School District, usually the liaison, the McKinney-Vento liaison, would come together with the family and talk about what they can do to help in terms of this is what the transportation offer is. This is what we can do to help. This is the school you'd be going to if you went to school in Antioch. This is the school you'd be going to, your former school in Richmond. Is this commute okay with you? Do you want to transfer? Do you want to try to stay there? And again, who gets to decide? It's that educational rights holder, right? Not the school districts. So that's an important thing to think about. Next slide, please. So the graduation rights, as youth experiencing homelessness can opt to graduate with a reduced state graduation exemption requirements so that means that, for example, in Mount Diablo Unified, you're required to have 220 credits to graduate. But if you qualify for this credit exemption, you can graduate with the minimum requirements of 130 credits. If you transfer after your second year of high school, it's supposed to be due to homelessness. Your homelessness caused your transfer. And if you're significantly deficient and unlikely to graduate on time. So if you're only missing 20 or 30 credits, you likely would not qualify for the credit exemption. So it's often based on how many terms there are left and how many credits there are remaining. But if you cannot reasonably graduate on your own without a credit exemption, and you did transfer after your second year of high school, and you are considered McKinney-Vento, you can qualify for what's called a credit exemption. Students also have a right to stay in school for their 5th year to complete all of their graduation requirements. Often our students end up doing both, where they will get the credit exemption in place and they will also need to stay for a 5th year. Oh, graduating with reduced credits can impact students' post-secondary options, so it's important to share that with them. What do you think? You're working with an 18-year-old 12th grader who's not on track to graduate. How can you help him? Help them? So I know it'd be hard for you directly to help them, but there's things you could suggest, which is, yes, let's apply. So a tutoring program is really helpful. That's a great idea. If you know of a tutoring program through the library, sometimes there's after school tutoring at the schools. But then we can also ask them, summer school. A lot of times the students don't need a credit exemption if they can go to summer school, or they can often do like after school credit recovery at their school sites. So I like how we're going to other ways besides just the credit exemption because that can have negative impacts on their post-secondary options. But in a worst case scenario, we could definitely have them talk to their counselor about seeking a credit exemption.
And when in doubt, they could always reach out to the Rosies of the districts and just connect the student to the district liaison. And then the district liaison can really dig into what can the district offer to be able to support the student.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Gina now, who's going to talk to us about unaccompanied youth.
All right, let's take a
lower my volume.
Okay. Let's take a look at how the McKinney-Vento Act defines unaccompanied youth. Next slide. According to the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, 1 in 5 homeless youth are unaccompanied. Next. So, according to the McKinney-Vento Act, an unaccompanied youth includes a homeless child or youth that is lacking fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence and not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So, with the unaccompanied youth, it's important to remember that in this instance, unaccompanied refers to not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian as opposed to legal custody. So oftentimes when a student leaves the home, they're forced out of the home, they've run away, parents or guardians, they maintain legal custody, but they're just not in the physical custody. So when it comes to unaccompanied youth, in practical terms, it refers to when a youth is not in the care of their parent or guardian. So an unaccompanied youth is a youth that is both homeless and unaccompanied. Next slide, please. But how do our youth become unaccompanied? Some of our youth that we come in contact with are really fleeing situations that are pretty severe at home. And that could be for a variety of reasons. So most often, there could be abuse or neglect in the home. Um, Oftentimes our youth will leave the home because they feel it's their only option. They don't feel safe there. They don't want to be there. About 2/3 of youth report that a parent is using drugs or alcohol in the home, and about 50% of runaway hotline callers have reported physical abuse occurring in the home. There could be conflict within the family. Teen pregnancy comes into play. There could be conflict in the home related to sexual orientation or gender identity. We know that the LGBTQIA plus community numbers, they are disproportionately represented among our unaccompanied homeless youth within the United States. Some children have been abandoned by their families. That could be the incarceration of a parent, the death of a parent. There could be economic challenges in the home. We run into this as well. Children are asked to leave the home. You're old enough to be on your own, or you need to leave the home because we have 4 other kids and you're old enough to go get a job and get your own place or find somewhere else to live so that the family can contribute and focus on the younger children in the home. And they feel that older youth are old enough to take care of themselves. Shelter policies, sometimes, as all of you know, there's lack of space or lack of shelters in this county, or counties or shelters with strict policies, no children allowed, men's only shelter, 30, 60, 90-day policies for a shelter, and then a family would have to leave and reset. So all of these problems come together when it comes to our unaccompanied youth. And we don't always know what's happening within the dynamic of a family, but in the education portion, it's our responsibility to make sure that the McKinney-Vento Act is implemented and providing our youth with access to education. Next slide, please. So what do you think? Here we are again, and this time we are meeting Celia. So Celia's 15. She has a mom who struggles with substance abuse. And as a result, she often has strangers in the home and participates in activities that cause Celia to feel anxious and uncomfortable. Eventually, Celia concluded that she would be safer living on her own. So she ran away and is now sleeping on the streets in downtown Antioch. She's not currently attending school, but she wants to re-enroll as soon as possible. So what do you guys think about Celia? Would she be considered an unaccompanied youth? Yes, no, I don't know. And also, what resources or education-based assistance can we offer Celia? So let's see what you guys come up with in the chat.
So there's quite a bit of yes, 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 yes. So she would be considered an unaccompanied homeless youth. And so far we have CORE as a potential resource. Enrollment in school of her origin or residency. I see.
We like context.
Yes.
That's great. Larkin in street use services. So yes, Celia would be considered an unaccompanied youth because she is not in the physical custody of her parent or guardian. When it comes to education-based assistance, yes, you could help Celia re-enroll in school, find out what school she was attending. Is she credit deficient? Find out who the liaison is. We could call Rosie and get some additional resources and make sure that Celia is re-enrolled in school. Keep in mind when it comes to our unaccompanied youth, an unaccompanied youth under the McKinney-Vento Act can walk into school and enroll themselves when they are not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. And I will hand it over to Alejandra.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Rosie. I'm going to try to increase my volume, so just in case someone needs to add anything. It is much harder to facilitate while sharing your screen than I anticipated. I will be vulnerable with you all. I usually have someone doing that and I just tend to present. So kudos to all those who facilitate and present and share screen and upload documents, because clearly I have not done the best job today, but I will keep moving. So you all have heard from me in the beginning is in regards to numbers and data around our county, how many children and youth experiencing homelessness we have, how many districts, and the percentage of those who are in our districts in regards to the larger percentage. So youth and children and youth experiencing homelessness in our county is a smaller percentage. I think it was like 1.4 or so. And so we leaned into then acknowledging that it is a smaller percentage. We want you to have information that will then guide your conversations with the school districts or a principal, a counselor, a teacher in supporting children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. We also acknowledge that there are some definitions that we want you to be aware of in regards to McKinney-Vento, the fixed, the regular, the adequate. We gave you a quick glance that you can, a flow chart that you can review when you're supporting families to see would they qualify. I will acknowledge that anyone who is most likely involved with the CoC, you most likely can lean towards, yes, they will be McKinney-Vento for the purpose and eligibility of the local education agency, aka the district, but still good reference tool for you all. And then Rosie went into information around the 5 core rights that they have, from immediate enrollment, school of origin, school of residency, graduation exemption, or you could refer to it as credit exemption, as well as transportation and disputes. And so all of those pieces are important for you all to have in regards to this next piece, which is putting everything together. So with that foundation, and every year we like to remind you of those components, acknowledging that the intent is for you to have just enough information so that you can support a mom, a dad, a family, a caregiver who has children and youth involved in the TK to 12th grade. Our hope is that you don't need to know everything about education, but you want to know just enough to be able to connect with the pieces and be able to support the family. Our intent is to acknowledge that we can't do this alone. We need the CoC for their expertise when it comes to housing and all of the resources that you all have to offer. And we want you to lean on us when it comes to the education component. The next slides will give you a sense of how we want all of the partners to come together, acknowledging that it takes a lot of effort. And sometimes all you can do and all you have time for is to reach out to your district liaison. And that is perfectly a good place to start. Reach out to the Rosies. As I mentioned, we will also drop it in the chat, the list of all of the district liaisons. We have it on our website. We update that every year. And so it tells you district by district who is the contact person. It gives you their email address and their phone number. And Gina is updating that in the chat as we speak. So tips that we want you to be aware of as you're partnering with us in education. One of the core components of what Jamie had placed in that document or that slide where it had a whole bunch of information, and she said, don't worry about it. We're going to move through those different elements. And that is making sure you have an understanding of the education rights around McKinney-Vento and familiarizing yourself with what laws protect children and youth, which we did. So that was the first step. You're here, you're participating, you're staying engaged, you're hearing this information, and you're being mindful, particularly when you're working with families who have young children. We're sharing information and data, both us on the education, you from the housing perspective. And so allowing both of us to be mindful and aware of the challenges that we face. I know that you all are doing your very best. And I know that my districts, and I say my districts because I take pride in all of the districts, are doing their very best. And I acknowledge we don't always get it right. But when we come to the table with transparency, with compassion, and acknowledging that sometimes we're not getting it right, it allows us the opportunity to have a conversation and address those gaps and be transparent with each other around how we can collaborate. So we welcome that. When you are working with someone at a school site or a district that you're just not seeing eye to eye, somehow the conversation is not leading to an outcome that you would want, we welcome you to reach out to the district liaison. And if the trouble is with the district liaison, reach out to me with the intent to be able to have those larger conversations and bring people to work through. And the intent is, I know that we don't always get it right, but when we are open to those conversations, we can often move through those barriers with the intent of helping children and youth have access to their education. As I mentioned, becoming familiar with the educational challenges that the children and youth face. We acknowledge that sometimes enrollment can be a big one, and identification. We need families to be transparent as much as they can with us. Often if they don't share that they're experiencing homelessness or other barriers, it's hard for the school site and the district staff to be able to provide the support that they need. And we understand that it comes with stigma to be able and willing to be transparent. But that's why I say to you all, get to know your district liaison, at least the district or the area, the county that you primarily support, because then you can reach out to them, have a conversation before you refer a family to talk to them. And it allows you and allows a family to have those vulnerable moments to say, yes, this is what I'm experiencing, and then for the district to be able to then provide that support. We also welcome, I'm sure Rosie would love to be invited to any meetings or any opportunity to present and share and be part of the community, especially if you are in a particular area. So for example, I know Shelter Inc. has a shelter out in Martinez, we welcome you to reach out to the Martinez liaison. Make it a habit to reach out to them and meet with them at least once at the beginning of the year and the middle of the year, just to make sure that things are working well, that when families are needing to be enrolled, the district has what they need, that the providers are able to help the family get what they need, whether it's birth certificates or whatever the case is. Now, I am reminding myself and you that yes, they don't need those documentations to get it immediately enrolled, but we do ask for those documentations down the road. So the intention with that in mind is to build the relationship with the liaison, get to know the liaison. They want to help the families as much as you want to help the families. And then it also can develop into something more formal in regards to protocols or procedures that the case managers and the liaisons could then use around best practices, continuing the work for years to come. And then if you want to get really formal, absolutely, I welcome a MOU. I know that I've been working with H3, and right now we're actually working with Mount Diablo Unified School District, Antioch Unified School District, and Pittsburgh Unified School District to start using HMIS as a way to case manage and support our families who are considered double, which by definition for HUD definition, they're not considered homeless, but we know that often our families who are experiencing doubled up can eventually and sometimes do experience homelessness as defined by HUD's definition. So we're looking at that formal MOU. And in regards to just overall, if your agency is in an area of the county that is working particularly with one or a couple of the districts, I encourage you to reach out to them to see if a MOU is something that would further the partnership, further the collaboration, as well as practices that both the agency and the district can follow to further support the family. Ultimately, we're here to support children and youth and making sure they're in school and that they're successful. So anything that we could do to partner with our CoC, we welcome that. I know that sometimes MOUs take a longer time, but it's definitely worth the partnership and the experience that we want our families to have, which is positive. And then support services. Any questions on any of that part before we move on to support services? Gina, any questions in the chat that I missed? Okay. So last year we had the opportunity to share a quick overview on some of the supports that we want you to be aware of. I definitely acknowledge that I am not a special education director or a special education resource staff that has lived and breathed special education for more years, but we will do a quick overview of IEPs and 504s, review Care Parent Network, Regional Center of the East Bay, IHSS, and then Social Security. And I also welcome Gina and Rosie. If I miss anything, feel free to unmute yourself and add to what I will share. So when it comes to IEPs, and a little plug, Rosie and I actually, no, it's not Rosie and I, we do quite a bit of webinars together, but it's actually the special education administrator for the County Office of Ed. We have an IEP special education webinar that we offer. And so if you're interested in learning much more, feel free to reach out to us and I can provide you the next webinar that we will offer. So with regards to IEPs, Individual Education Program, it is a law that offers special services and supports to children who have disabilities. It is through IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, forgive me for that. And the purpose is, like I mentioned, to provide support and services that acknowledges their disability and acknowledging what support and services need to be in place to seek growth. Students must have one of the 13 identified at least one out of the 13 disabilities under the IDEAs. And we won't go into what are those 13 disabilities, but If you actually Google it, I'm sure you will find it. But again, you are welcome to attend our webinar to learn more. And with those services, if they have been identified as having one of the 13 disabilities, it comes with support and instructional, how can I say, instructional format, or to really ensure that they're getting what they need. So if a kiddo is not reading at their grade level, then they're maybe being pulled out of class in order to provide one-on-one reading support with a reading specialist. What's mentioned on the slide is related therapies or individualized goals. So part of that IEP, there are goals that are set, and with those goals come services in order for the school to be able to provide growth and opportunity one year to the next year. And the plan does lay out what those goals are and what those supports look like. So for example, using the reading example, if a kiddo is not reading at their grade level, they're going to be pulled out of their class once or twice or every day for 30 minutes, and will be going through X, Y, and Z in regards to increasing those services, or meaning increasing their goal and increasing their reading skills, and then potentially looking at next year, do they need more services or not? There are reviews that happen annually, and then reevaluation that happens every 3 years. I know that was really quick and quite a lot of information, but feel free to reach out to us. The main thing to keep in mind is if a parent or a caregiver feels like the student's not doing well and there's something going on, you can reach out to the district liaison for that referral. The parent can also make the referral directly, but the intent is to highlight that there are opportunities to get more support when they notice that the student is not moving in the right direction.
Can I just
Often
jump
this,
in for a quick sec,
yes,
Alejandra? Just on that one, if the student is not doing well, there are other things we can do too besides place them in special education or give them a 504. The IEP is placing a student in special education, and that can be totally necessary. But we always want to try everything we can first. And in fact, it's not just that we always want to try it. By IDEA, which is also federal law, right up there beside McKinney-Vento, we have to try everything first before putting a student in special education. So have we tried tutoring? That was mentioned in the chat several times. Have we tried an additional period of reading help during the school day? And what have we tried at the school site? So typically the first step for this would be what's called an SST, a student study team, to make a plan to try all of those things. So if you're working with a school district, and you say we need to assess for special education and you feel like they're putting on the brakes, know that that is their legal obligation to try everything else first before going to special education.
yes. Thank you, Rosie. You perfect segue into acknowledging that IEPs and 504s are an important component. And we don't want you to feel like you need to be the expert, but we do want you to know that if you feel that something's happening, loop in the liaison, because then they can walk you through that process of the SST or putting into place tutoring or other related interventions. So when a student does not qualify for an IEP, they don't have one of the 13 disabilities, but they do need accommodations. That is when they could exercise the potential right of a 504. And I won't go into too much, it's all there, but ultimately when they are not eligible for one of the 13 disabilities, then they can consider a 504 for accommodations. Rosie, anything you want to add before I move on to the next slide?
The IEP is much more limited. There are only 13 qualifying conditions that would get you an IEP, whereas a 504 is a little bit more broad, and it can often provide a lot of accommodations for students without placing them in special education. And it's if there's a known or suspected disability. So for example, anxiety or PTSD, those would be legitimate reasons to have a Section 504. And if you have documentation of that from a therapist or a doctor or anything like that, that would help us get a Section 504. And we don't have to go through the full process of going through the assessments and the IEP meetings to get the IEP. So I would say start with the 504, see if it addresses the issue, right? As we're doing all of like the least restrictive setting and the starting with everything we can before placing a student in special education.
Mhm. Thank you, Rosie. And supporting that family who may potentially have a kiddo with a disability, a Care Parent Network is a great resource to partner as they're navigating the process of talking to a liaison, potentially scheduling an SST, considering a 504 or an IEP. They're a great support that provides emotional support, information, training, resources, all with the intent of helping them navigate that process. They give information in regards to the dispute resolution, as well as IEP preparation consultation. And they do serve 0 to 22. I myself, when I was going through the process of trying to get one of my kiddos through the process of the IEP, reached out to that group and thought it was a very informative and a great group of individuals coming together to support parents, especially if you have no information around how to navigate this, or even tons of information, but just want to connect with other parents. Rosie?
I was going to jump in on that one too. This one can be incredibly helpful if you're working with a family and the family has expressed that they maybe have trouble wading through like the IEP assessment paperwork. It's 180 pages. I mean, it can be really, really long, right? It's very dense, often very technical academic jargon. So if you need somebody to work with that parent to help them understand what all of these things mean, that's really, really helpful. If the parent is coming to us from another country where they had a different school system or there's a language barrier, that the Care Parent Network can be really helpful for making sure that the parent knows their rights, the parent understands what the information that's being presented to them. They can even attend the IEP with the family and help make sure that they have an advocate, and their services are entirely free.
Thank you, Rosie. Another great resource is Regional Center of the East Bay, and they can serve as a resource for diagnosis, referral support for children and youth with disabilities. That process for the referral and diagnose and services does take some time, but is also a great service, especially once the kiddos are diagnosed. Parents can access so much support. And that can include anything from summer camps to respite to ABA services. It does depend, obviously, and it's case by case, but it is a really great resource for parents to go through, especially when they know or they're debating, do they have a diagnosis? Can they potentially be eligible? We're seeing some disability and confirmation on the IEP. This is always a great support. I myself as well am a member or a parent who has a kiddo who is part of Regional Center, and I've gotten quite a bit of support for my little guy, and it is a wonderful experience, I have to say. I know, Rosie, you
Yeah,
have.
I have a kiddo who gets regional center support as well. The one thing that I share with families is it's not a fast process to get in.
Mhm.
It takes about 10 to 12 months. That's what my experience. I think it's supposed to take less, and maybe it's gotten faster. So if regional center's on here, I love you all so much. And if it's faster than that, then great. But in my experience as a parent, but then also in my experience work supporting families, it's about a school year. I tell them we're going to be doing this process for the year, but once you get in, there's incredible support. And the piece that I like to share too is that once the student exits traditional schooling, they can help pay for a transitional program. They can help pay for transitional housing so that those students don't, become unhoused, and so that they are secure and that they have job opportunities as well. I've also made regional center referrals for parents who are experiencing, who have disabilities themselves and they need additional support.
Rosie, would you like to share anything particular for this slide?
Oh, well, the IHSS is, I'm sure some of you on here are probably really familiar with IHSS, but if we're working with somebody who qualifies as low income and we're providing care for them, if that person requires direct care, then their caregiver can be paid to care for them. So this is often a way where we help our families, get a little bit more income so that they can become securely housed. So obviously there's a lot of factors there, but there's just kind of the process there. And we threw the link in there too. So don't forget that piece. If the student has a disability, usually a more serious disability where they can't be left alone, or they need like that kind of constant support, then the parent could qualify for IHSS if the family is socioeconomically disadvantaged.
Would you like to take this one too,
Sure.
Rosie?
Yeah, so this one right here, oh, what did we say about this one last year? I had a bunch of these last year where getting the Social Security payee changed so that, like, especially if we're working with an unaccompanied youth, for example, we were able to get some students their Social Security money, or we've had parents who have passed away and left their children. We had two this year who the parents both died in a car accident, and then the two teenage children moved in with a 19-year-old brother, right? So they're all living together. So helping them get their Social Security is, again, just it's income for the family.
Thank you, Rosie. And I think you are
Yes.
up next.
So I don't know about you all, but I'm spending a lot of my time right now working on immigration related issues. So I just wanted to share 3 quick resources to help with this piece. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So if you are working with a family who shares that they are concerned about detention or deportation, the very best thing that we can do for that family is to help them create a family preparedness plan. And we've done this with several families. This is a pretty extensive document. I don't know if you want to click on it, Alejandra, because might take you to a million different windows, which we don't want to do. But with this will be shared with you and you'll be able to click on that link. I'd say if it's one thing that you take for supporting families who are worried about detention or deportation, it's this, because there's tremendous power in being prepared. So the family preparedness plan really helps them identify who would care for their children in their absence. Financially, what would they do? And it really makes their wishes very clear so that in the event that the family can't pick the child up from school because maybe they were detained, and this has happened in our school district, we know what to do. We know what their wishes are. And that is very important to us. And it does give a lot of our families a little bit more peace of mind that there's a plan in place. Okay, there's an English and a Spanish version. We didn't create this document. It's from a national organization. We didn't pay to have it translated into Dari because we work with a significant number of Afghan families. So I would highly recommend getting that out to families. Part of that is making sure that the families have a lot of contacts in areas. A lot of our McKinney-Vento families, if you look at their contacts, it says like one parent's name, one single parent's name, and that's it. Well, what if that parent is detained? Right? The only choice at that point would be for those children to go into foster care. We can't release them to anybody who's not in contacts. So part of what it has them do is make sure they're updating their contacts. And they want a lot of contacts in that school system, right? So that they have them, because the school is legally allowed to call anybody in the emergency contacts and release the student to that person. So the family preparedness plan will really help with that. And then also we want to designate a caregiver affidavit. Again, that's all kind of gone over in the family preparedness plan, but definitely can be really helpful for our families with keeping them, in a as good a spot as possible. Let's go to the next one.
And I was able to add the link to the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so this is another one. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but if you're working with a family and someone has been detained by immigration, whether they've been detained or deported, or you're not sure, they went in for a court hearing or they were picked up, you can click here on these various links and you will have this slideshow. And we have used this to locate family members for clients who could not locate a family member, and it has been helpful to us. So I wanted to share that with all of you. Next slide, please. Oh, there's also a list of free attorneys. I'm sure Stand Together Contra Costa, that's on there, but that's our go-to for MDUSD. Alma Fund is like my big gem for you. Hopefully you've all been working with Alma, but Alma is through San Francisco County. And they provide financial assistance. Actually, it's not through the county, sorry. It's in San Francisco County. It's a private organization, but they provide financial assistance for families whose primary wage earner has been detained or deported. So that has been really helpful. We've actually connected a few families who the primary wage earner was detained or deported. So then the family was, first goes the PG&E, or first goes the Wi-Fi, then goes the PG&E, all of the utilities are being turned off, and then, potentially a loss of housing. So if we can get them financial assistance, it can be a really important preventative measure. So those are three of my best gems for the immigration assistance. But if you find you're working with a family who's going through this, you're welcome to reach out to us, even if the student is not part of MDUSD. I'd be happy to help as much as I can. Okay, but those are three of my best resources.
Any questions? There was one in the chat that said, do families need verification of their homelessness?
That is a district by district decision. In our district, we do require verification of homelessness. It's usually very straightforward. If they're working with CoR, it's CoR, we get a release of information and CoR verifies. If the family is doubled up, we would typically send a child welfare and attendance liaison out just to check to make sure that the family is staying where they say that they are staying. So for most families, it is very straightforward process to verify. I know that Antioch, Liberty out in Brentwood, that they verify. I think that Richmond, tries to verify as well, West Contra Costa County. I think Antioch does not verify simply because they don't have the manpower to do so. But I think it's district by district. There are a lot of ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. There was a comment in the chat about how IHSS eligibility often cannot be provided when there isn't a home to stay in. And yes, that is definitely the difference between McKinney-Vento on the education side. We often have many of our families that are doubled up, where often CoC is working with those who are without a home. And so there's some information there that was provided. Jamie just put in the chat, before you leave, please take a moment to complete the short survey. Thank you, Jamie. Let me see if there are any other questions.
Yeah, are there any other questions?
Well, if not, feel free to scan our survey till we could get some feedback, as well as our contact information, so you could reach out to us. And
Thank all three of you for a great training. I really, really appreciate you.
We appreciate you too.
Want to remind folks that we are going to send out an email afterwards with the recording and the slide deck and another link to the survey that just helps us figure out if the trainings are hitting the mark. And please do not hesitate to reach out to any of these three presenters or to us. I'll put our email in here again. If you have not been to one of our trainings before, or you have not signed up yourself, reach out to me and we can get you that link. I think we can hang out for a minute if there's any other questions. But otherwise, I think we're done. You're getting some love in the chat. If you don't have questions, you're welcome to go. Please take a minute to do the survey. But we'll hang out in case I'll stop